Welcome to the Startup Grind.
We try to slow down speed as slow as possible, so that you have no have few problem understanding what we are saying. Yeah. So without further delay, let's kickstart fireside chat with Ben. And first of all, I would like you to introduce yourself first, and then.
Sure. Thanks, Chance. So my name is Ben Chodrov. I just started a company called Labify. Labify is going to be focused on a variety of different technology, but the main technology will be in artificial intelligence. We also do a lot of work for consulting on DevOps, cloud, IoT, so a wide range, but I'm really excited to be here in Guangzhou. I just moved to Guangzhou 2 weeks ago. My wife is Chinese, so she has an opportunity to work here in China. And it's my exciting opportunity to go and learn Chinese and live here in China.
Cool. Yeah, we know that you've been working in the US on the IoT field, and you work on big data that collected from machine. And can you share us a little bit, some example that how your company or your client that make really good use of the machine data, and then how do they use the machine data from the machine and also leverage the learning from those data and improve their business?
Sure. It's a lot. So we can spend the next 45 minutes going over that. So previously, when I was working in America, I worked for another startup. The name was ClearObject. And before that, I was working at IBM. I was doing software development. And then eventually went into working on the Watson IoT and software development area to teach customers how do you do integration of cloud and physical devices, whether that be data acquisition or knowing more about your customers. What I did at ClearObject was primarily enabling customers, how do you get started in IoT? Not so much in the physical hardware, but what is the purposes that you can use this data collection to go in and extend your business? What problems can we go solve once we have an amount of data? So one in particular example that we did for about 3-4 years, and it's still ongoing now, is with Cummins Motor. Cummins is a diesel motor manufacturer, still actually I think very big here in China as well. Cummins makes diesel motors for all sorts of applications, whether it be mining equipment or working within trucking, as well as in a variety of different applications. Of course, like any engine, it has wear and tear, and so therefore it needs maintenance. And what Cummins is in the business of is making sure that they don't have to pay a lot of money for the warranty. These engines are very, very costly to run, and any downtime that a customer experiences is very detrimental to their business and can erode sales, and they want to make sure that customers like Cummins engines. So for them, they were already collecting a lot of data, but they weren't putting it to any use. They would collect it all to their enterprise within their four walls, and it would be very difficult for them to go and analyze such a large amount of data. What my company helped did is create a data lake. A lake in that they need some place to store this data and a place where they can actually start analyzing it and doing some type of improvement of their engines based on the data. Very simple when you get down to it, but very difficult when you consider the engines can be anywhere in the world. They can be 30, 40 years old, so they have a very large amount of different uses of the engines. So some customers may have duty cycles of maybe 5–10%. They only use them infrequently. Others are trying to get 100% utilization of their engines. And when you're in a mine, sometimes it's very, very difficult to even get the internet down into a mine. So some places where you're trying to collect data, it can be very difficult to even just get it back. And given the size of these engines, any downtime whatsoever can be very, very costly. What we did is we proposed a solution that worked in a variety of different ways, where companies could either manually extract data, literally just send it over an FTP, FTP, all the way to physical devices that can be attached to the engine, which can use cellular, Wi-Fi, and a variety of other connectivity that's available in that particular region to be able to send it on back. And we created this in the cloud. It's been quite successful for them. They were able to take that and create analytics on top of it, which I can go into more detail later.
Okay. Yeah, you know that because we Sunrise Entrepreneurs Network around the world, and inevitably, you know, in your experiences, you came from a really strong technical background. Like you work in IBM as an architect in IBM, and you want to, and then by joining Clear Object, that clearly means that you also really entrepreneurial guy. And what does that experience taught you? What are the biggest learning that you get out of your working experience in Clear Object?
It's a great question. I could have easily stayed in IBM. IBM works on the very same problems, and a lot of startups do this. Where I found working in a startup to be the most exciting part is if you have an idea, you can run with it. That's not always true in a large company, and even in small companies, unless you're in a position where you can make that decision, you may not be able to. But startups tend to be easier to take that idea and run with it. I love that aspect, not just being an armchair philosopher and thinking, well, maybe we can put this data in the cloud and maybe we can do something. Let's go put the data in the cloud and let's go do something with it. That sounds a lot more exciting to me, and you can do it in a very short amount of time. These aren't, mind-breaking concepts. People talk about them, but to actually go do them and actually have success around it, that's what I find very personally rewarding. So I joined Clear Object 5 years ago. I'm no longer there. But in that short amount of time, for 5 years, I was able to work with many, many different companies, Cummins being one of them, but I got an opportunity to work with a lot of different industries very quickly. I think that's the most fun part about a startup is getting an idea, running with it, and getting to go do 1,000 more of those.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. And since you ended up here today, and there must be a reason. And if you like, you can. We are really curious about your story and why you're here in Guangzhou in China. And what do you expect? What are the reasons that you came to China, and what are the things that you expect the most? Down the road in the next 3 years' time.
Sure. So my reasons for being in China are both practical and strategic. My practical reason is my wife is here. That makes it very simple, but strategically, I do find IoT is going to happen in China first and then go elsewhere. So it's not just for my wife, as much as I would say that it's all for her. But strategically, I really think it's exciting what's happening in China, to see what's happening with the cloud and its adoption. I do find that China has been slower to adopt the cloud, perhaps than the rest of the world. But that's not to say it's slow now. It's extremely fast, faster in many ways than anywhere else in the world. And I think the next generation of capabilities are going to happen here. So for me personally, being a part of it is just as much fun as getting to spend time with my wife and see her successful career too.
Cool. And through the conversation that you had previously, I know that you already have your own consulting company doing tech service and solution. And can you? The name is called Electrify. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Electrify has been doing, and what are your plans for Electrify, operation in China, and how you're going to, steer the direction of Electrify, down the road?
Sure. So Labify is starting out as a technology consulting company. Not unlike many technology consulting companies, the primary application, in my opinion, is to help companies both from the West who want to understand how to work with Chinese companies. I come from a unique position of understanding what it's like to work in the West and what they're looking for, and helping navigate here in China is something that I can certainly help do for any company. But additionally, I want to work with local Chinese companies here that are working on artificial intelligence and getting up to speed on next-gen capabilities before the rest of the world even sees it, so that I can be on the ground floor. This expression to get started at the beginning. I want to see what's happening and help out with it. In particular, artificial intelligence is very hot around the world. Artificial intelligence can mean a lot of different things. For some people, it's a linear regression model on big data. That is, artificial intelligence. But there's so many aspects to it too when you get into natural language, when you get into visual recognition or speech recognition. There's a lot of different areas, and the technology is in many ways being built here in China, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Cool. Yeah, talking about artificial intelligence, it's a buzzword, right? But a lot of people talk about it, and also since the Chinese government are really enthusiastic about it, and down to the district, local government, like in Guangzhou, So, but the problem and the situation, it seems to me, because from my experience, from my connection with the industry, I have a really strong sense that it's real difficult to find talents. And what are the practical ways for China company to train, to retain, or to acquire the talents that will really can work on big data and eventually become an expert in AI?
Sure. So a lot of companies are waking up and realizing that artificial intelligence applies to them too. Even if you're in trucking, if you're in manufacturing medicine, artificial intelligence is going to impact that business in ways that are going to completely change those businesses. What's important for a lot of companies is trying to find people who understand it. That means you have to have some sort of background in understanding basic statistics, large data sets, and being able to take a scientific method for how to make decisions. It's no longer can you just put your finger in the air and say, well, we should head this direction. No, we should be looking at the data. We should be putting machines on this, and in real time, or at least in some repeatable fashion that we can measure, make informed decisions that machines can say, you should be changing your product in this particular way. And that should go back to the business, not necessarily to technical individuals, but people who are getting to decide where the future of their company is should be looking at this data and using that to steer how their business is operating. We've seen, something like Netflix, it's no longer the case where you go in to buy a DVD.
Because in our software industry and the tech world, we know that people are still talking about and look at it as a hot world. It just means that actually few people understand what it is all about. And I also would like to lead the conversation a little bit more down, deeper into, hey, okay, given a problem, like, okay, how do I build a recommender system? And what are the general process of defining a problem that can only be solved by AI, and all the way from building the team, release the version of the product that have the AI part, and then ship to the market, and then get the logistic and engineering part of making AI in real product. And I mean, what are the general idea that everybody in the room should know, so that they have an idea, okay, here's what I want, here's how I would like to approach this problem with my own organization and our own AI strategy. Can you shed a bit more light on the general process and the thinking behind this?
The general process in many cases, like many business changes, requires a lot of different stakeholders to be involved. When artificial intelligence is introduced into a business, it's important to have consistent data, and a lot of times there's a lot of inconsistent data, especially for an existing business. It's so much easier when you're starting as a startup and everything's net new and you can define it from the beginning perfectly. There's a luxury that some startups have that they don't realize of being able to get it right from the start. Not always done that way, but for an existing business, a lot of times it means bringing a lot of different people that know how the business operates, whether that be the operation manager, sales, executives, of course, but also people who are building the product. They all, in many cases, will have their own data sources, things that are of use for questioning And it's important to establish a data lake to be able to have a centralized location where those questions can be asked. Often, before you can ask any questions, though, you need to clean the data. So again, being able to define how all these different groups use that data and describe it is important. And the way that I typically work at gathering this is to do a design thinking session, to get the right people into the room, to make sure that we understand who are the participants, what are they trying to get out of it, what questions are they currently trying to struggle in answering, and then what do they currently have. A lot of times, they have the answers within the room. They're just not able to collaborate together. They're not able to pull the resources across different organizations and be able to come up with a solution that they can all agree on. What my company has helped in both at ClearObject and what I'm planning to do at Labify is organize that to get the right people in the right room to figure out the data that they already have and then put together technical solutions that address those.
Cool. Yeah, because in the industry, over the years of observation, of my personal observation, I see that there are a lot of problems facing whatever team who really want to build some AI, technology or products. Because typically in a startup team, you don't have enough money, you don't have enough people, you don't even have enough data, to train your algorithm and become really good product of AI. So now it seems to me the answer to that problem, there are a few questions. So maybe one answer to that problem for new team to get into AI is not to build the technology by itself, but also leverage the ecosystem, even the bigger company who have the data to train their algorithm to make and then make the product happen. So how do you envision? What do you envision that a solution or a collaborative partnership model work for the staff or for the new team to actually get where they wanted to go with their product of AI?
To get started, a lot has changed over the past decade. It used to be that you would throw away data because it was too expensive to retain. Obviously, that's not the case. The cloud has really democratized the ability, both for a startup as well as for a large enterprise, to be able to get very cheap access to resources. It's important, though, to have an initiative inside the company that says we are going to retain this data. We may not know what questions we want to ask of it today, but tomorrow we may have something that we want to find out about it. And then it's important to use that as part of the strategy to reflect as you're doing your next planning, to put a project in place that says, okay, we collected all this information. If you're running a retail shop, it may be putting sensors in to actually track heat mapping of participants of where they're looking, where they're physically at the store. It may also be important to then pull in your ERP, enterprise resource planning systems, to be able to say, what inventory am I stocking? How much is it being purchased? Why is it selling so much? There's so many aspects of data that need to be put into place, and unless you're collecting it and putting it into a system where you can come back to and ask questions, you're going to be on the outside looking in. Again, startups have that luxury of doing it right. For a lot of existing enterprises, they're only now just realizing the error in their ways to say, oh, IT charged me too much to retain this, so I got rid of it, or it's in a very inconvenient location that nobody can look at, and I hoard it and don't let anyone else look at it.
So does that mean that the team will really want there is, because there is the main problem with starting trying to build an AI product is probably the number one is the cost, right? Cost of retaining the data, the computing cloud, and also the prohibitive barrier of using big data. So what are the solutions? Maybe Labify is already working on it, and any.
I think advise, but using partners does help reduce cost. But even within the own organization, without using a partner, it's important to again to make sure that from a top-down perspective that people agree that they're going to share the data, to not create silos between the different groups. You need to have people allowing others access to the data, and that organizationally can be very disruptive, very difficult culturally for some companies to overcome. So it needs to come in many times from the top down that it's important to the company's future that we're going to share data, that we're going to allow people to ask questions of the data. And then that inevitably means that somebody's going to have to describe the data. They're going to have to say, what did that field mean when it says this? And again, it becomes a challenge for other organizations. They may feel like, oh, I'm going to get measured on this, or I'm going to get penalized. People are going to subject me to the criticism if they see that this data is not as good as because they don't understand perhaps what that data means. Organizationally, it becomes a challenge to address that, and putting it in the context of an AI project can help demilitarize it, make it more accessible to everybody, that we're all in this together, that we may have a lot of data that we're not proud of, or that is not accurate, or it's not very easy to understand. But we're going to come at it as a project to look at it, to see if there's ways that we can either collect better data or improve it, or maybe find new approaches to solve it. Again, culturally, it can be very disruptive to a company, and it needs to be done in a very well-coordinated manner.
Yeah, that's because the recent case that Facebook, the case that facing Facebook is a really interesting case, on this topic. What's your take on the Facebook's case?
Oh boy. Personally, I don't use Facebook anymore, so I think that says enough about the topic. To say there's a lot of trust that we all put into these systems, regardless of what the laws are, regardless even if you've read the terms of service. There's a lot of at stake. It's your own personal information. For some of that information, you never get an opportunity to change it. It's with you for life. And with that comes a lot of security risk, of course, but even just it's none of your business risk for other people to go and look at it. Let alone then the somewhat dirty aspect of it could get sold. And you don't know how they're selling it or ways that it could influence you. It may mean that, I think there was a really funny article I read about where somebody purchased a toilet seat on Amazon. And forevermore now, all the ads they see on Amazon are toilet seats. Well, yes, I purchased a toilet seat, but I didn't expect to see toilet seats for the rest of my life everywhere I go. And it's funny, but this type of data is being collected for that purpose, to help ideally encourage you to buy other, perhaps relevant items, not just toilet seats. But there is a darker side to it, to say, well, just because I had an email conversation doesn't mean you get to read the conversation itself and perhaps use it to say, okay, you're traveling to this location, that's a competitor. Should we notify your boss that you're now talking to a competitor? Whoa, no.
Mm-hmm.
And there are aspects that it's very hard to describe in a law.
Mm-hmm.
I think Facebook is probably correct. They legally are not liable for what they have done. And it's up to us as individuals to decide, do we like this? Is this what we want to have happen? That's not unique to Facebook. I think that's common throughout every single platform. Is having to do the right thing is very difficult and fun.
Okay. So coming back to the business of AI and also the talent acquisition problem. Because there are, from my understanding, there must be different role in the AI project, right? Domain expert, software engineer, data analyst, and what are the general roles that make up a team who can actually build some AI?
Sure. It tends to start with a business analyst to understand what the problem is, somebody who understands what the business is trying to achieve. There are many technical solutions for this, and it's not usually one individual technically that's going to be able to solve it all. As much as a business might say, I've got an AI specialist, in my opinion, they don't exist. To say that they know every single possible AI that exists there's just too much. So from the business analyst collecting requirements about what they're trying to solve, you then need to figure out what are potential solutions, what data do we already have, what do we need to go and collect new, and then what technologies already exist, or what do we have to go build ourselves. A lot of companies are now in a nice spot where they don't have to build AI technology from the ground up. You can purchase it as a service or find an open source software that can maybe get you halfway there, and then be able to tailor it beyond that. For a lot of companies, though, the biggest struggle is still building models. There's just so much data. It's not a matter of just pulling a bunch of rows, putting it into Excel and running a regression. You have to literally have minimally somebody who understands some Python, some R, and some ability to run.
Methodological step that this programmer should take to get there, to become part of the AI.
Joining an existing project tends to be a good place to start because you're going to get real-world practice around this. It really is difficult to just say, in general, we're going to teach you AI again because there are so many different frameworks, so many different types of data sources. But joining an existing project where you can work with people who are familiar with big data systems, or that's a requirement in AI. It's rare that you're going to have just a very small amount of data in an AI project, whether you're training it or whether you're building a model itself or you leveraging an existing one. Those are fundamental skills that a lot of people coming out of university, I certainly never got to work with that in my university now. Hopefully now that's changing, they're teaching that. But that is typically the starting point. And then from there, picking up existing services that exist. Looking at China Telecom, looking at Aliyun, Qing Cloud, there's so many as a service AI. It's a great place to start rather than trying to run it all yourself. I would highly recommend going through tutorials like that because they provide a good training ground for you to get started. Myself personally, I've been using quite a few of those to pick up the new ones because they're coming out so quickly.
You mean online courses like Udacity? You personally look at courses like AI courses on Udacity?
It's the best way other than having to go to another university class. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, because I personally know there is a part of manager in this room. He already taking Udacity courses and just for the purpose of trying to achieve to get more understanding how to build AI component.
It gives you awareness, but again, joining an actual project is very different. You get to apply it in the real world tends.
And talking about real world, I mean, also really difficult I mean, it's also not necessarily difficult, but it's a key problem to say, okay, the project has to be properly funded, right? Somebody has to cover the cost of the machine and the data and everything, right?
And a lot of times that's again something that you want to make sure before you get into the project that it's not just going to be a limited set of data that with no visibility. You need to have sponsorship within the organization to make sure that this is something that as you request data, they're going to provide it, they're going to be able to explain the data to you, that you're going to be able to clean it up. It tends to be intensive.
Yeah, in a sense, it's a resource-intensive, initiative, and also because this year I'm personally more involved in the computing infrastructure business, and what are the general requirements to run an AI project in terms of the computing resources that it takes to run a typical AI project?
It depends greatly on the nature of what AI problem you're working on, and then how you're going to store and analyze the data. Because there's so many different types of systems. In the case of Cummins, this was 4 years ago, and this is when Hadoop was really, really big. We probably would have done it differently if we had done it today, but that was what we had at the time. So in that case, they're now up to, I think they're at 36 terabytes across 11 different physical machines. And that was enough for their internal group, and then their production group has about 4 times larger than that. So it's big, and doing that, they could have certainly done that. I mean, Cummins is a very large multinational. They have that capacity easily within their 4 walls. The challenge then is, can you collaborate? And no was the answer. There's too many interested parties to do it within one physical location of Cummins. So the cloud, in many ways, became a democratization where everybody had access to a common cloud element, and we were able to build it out through, and it also provides a number of other advantages for disaster recovery and high availability, which are separate. But just getting access and having a place where storing data was cost effective, you had an infinite amount of compute resources that you could spin up and down as you saw fit. These were important aspects to, I'd say, just about any large-scale AI problem, where the cloud makes a lot of sense to do rather than trying to get the CapEx budget to do it internally.
Yeah, and you talk about the technology platform that you used for the previous product like 5 years ago, 4 years ago. It's called Hadoop, right? So what are the current pretty popular what are the other framework for doing machine learning and AI and it's open source and available for use.
Sure. I mean, Hadoop is still widely used, so it's not to be disparaging against it. It's still a very good option. Spark, perhaps a little better, and that you can do a lot of the processing more in RAM rather than on physical disks, and that's given a lot of speed advantages. Particularly for Cummins, they were getting to the point where, yes, I could search unstructured data very quickly, and again, unstructured data is very common when you're dealing with large amounts of data. You may not be able to cleanly define it into rows and columns, but that's a good question to ask is, what does your data look like today, Mr. Customer? If it is unstructured, it's going to be a very different question than if you have already existing structured data, and it's possible to do ETLs, just load it into a common relational database. We had lots of different projects. We've used MongoDB, we've used Spark, we've used CouchDB and CloudAnt as another option. Those are pretty common, and then as we get into the more new, we're getting into TensorFlow and such, to be able to do the analytics side of it, to be able to run through different options. At the end of the day, my personal favorite for data store is object storage. It's cheap, and I don't know what I'm going to do with that data yet. I just know I need it, and I can then move it, regardless of where it ends up being, into the variety of different systems. So if any company was like getting into what I call analysis paralysis, where you're constantly just saying, well, where do I get started? Should I put it in this system, or should I put it in that system? Put it in the cheapest thing you can possibly find that you can grab, and that's probably object storage. And then figure out what you're going to do with it later. Because in the meantime, you're going to have a lot of questions about, do I have all the right data? Do I need to get more data? Is the data I have, can I understand it? If you immediately start buying or start using open source systems, you're probably going to architect it incorrectly, and it won't scale. And then as you answer all these questions that you still haven't even asked, you're likely going to have to redo it. And so the sooner you put it into the object storage, you can then start loading it into a variety of different systems as the project evolves.
Okay. Yeah, and that's, I hope that's not a topic that is too deep, technically too deep.
Raise it, does everybody know object storage?
Object storage? Anybody know?
No? Okay. We got one. Okay. So object storage, basically binary text data, whatever you want to put into it, pretty much the cheapest option you're going to find in most cloud providers. And you could even get localized object storage stores, SAN arrays and such that can do it too. Cheap. Keep it cheap to start. It's always my recommendation because it's practical and you don't know if it's going to be what you stick with, but as you change your mind, you're not going to regret it. Pretty certain.
Cool. So since you, because I know that you are going to stay in Guangzhou for a longer while, and can you share us, which part of the city you're living in Guangzhou, and how people can approach you, to talk about stuff and talk about the idea, and what are the resources that you already have. And you can also use those resources to help, startup team to improve the technology and also help them with their talent training.
Sure. So I moved to Tianhe. So I'm living over in the Zhejiang new city area.
New town.
Town. Seems like a city. It's a lot bigger than a town. That's for sure. So I recently moved over there. I have alapify.com, and I'm just now going through the process of registering it as an official entity here in China. So that's my next big adventure, is to figure out how to become a company. I do have another company through my wife, since she's Chinese, that I'm operating through, so I can start today, but I'm building out a new one for myself. If anyone's interested in having help with any AI project, IoT, cloud, DevOps, or honestly just to talk about anything, I'm happy to help. I've worked in startups for the past 5 years, so if you're in a startup, I know the pain and I know the suffering. And if you're not in a startup and you're in a large corporation, I worked at IBM, so I know your pain and I know your suffering. So I'm happy to talk about any technical topic whatsoever. And I'm new here in town, so I'm looking for new people to meet and would love the opportunity to hear about what you're working on.
Cool.
Thanks.
So in China, because probably this is my last question. In China, we are really excited about AI and what potentially it can achieve. So can you imagine down the road how these many Chinese companies who are hungry for AI talent but they don't know how to get them and but how do you see electrify into this big mix of China's landscape of AI industry and ecosystem, and how are you going to contribute to China's the AI industry?
Sure. I mean, right now AI is hot, so every single major company is vying for the best talent throughout the world. It's not just China. U.S., Europe, anybody who's anybody is looking for these type of engineers to help out with. What I think is important for any company is to advertise the problems that they're trying to solve, not necessarily the technology that they're throwing at it, because the real people who are trying to make a name for themselves in artificial intelligence don't really care what technology is being used. It's more important to say, what data are you bringing to the table? What problem am I solving? And what visibility am I going to get, or funding, especially to go and solve that problem? That's more exciting. So as people in Guangzhou want to attract top AI talent and get them to work on it, talk about your challenges. You've got great businesses here to talk about, and what I think Latify can help do is perhaps provide a nexus point, a place where a lot of different companies can talk about the AI challenges that they're working on and the approaches that they're going to take, and use that as a way to attract talent to the region, to come into Guangdong in general and work on these problems.
Yeah, I'm excited about what's coming up with the Latify, and also thank you very much for sharing the ton of frictions between China and US.
Oh boy. Personally, I think it'll solve itself. Political climate in America is interesting right now. There's a lot of people that don't understand globalism and that trade will continue to happen. So they yell at politicians to go change things, and then the politicians do what they ask. But strategy doesn't always make it into the picture. It's just politics, and politics is yeah, the Elon Musk, everything's doomed and we got to be careful versus everything's going to be all right. I do think that there is going to be a lot of jobs that are going to fundamentally change or completely disappear. That's for certain. You look at manufacturing, that's been since the entire age of manufacturing started, we've mechanized, and artificial intelligence is just the next incarnation of that. There will be jobs that just completely disappear, and there will be a lot of them. But that's not to be all doom and gloom. I do think that, again, people can learn to adapt to new jobs. People that understand how to make decisions based on data are going to be incredibly in hot demand. And you're going to see a big shift of workers that it doesn't take a ton of smarts necessarily to look at data and make informed decisions, especially if the computer's assisting with it. And that's how I look at AI is most of AI is going to be computers assisting humans. It's not computers replacing humans yet. And that's going to be the truth for a large part of my lifetime, in my opinion. It'll be my kids' generation that has to deal with it, where it'll be complete replacement. But certainly, like in manufacturing, when you look at that, there's just a lot of jobs that have been fully automated, and for good reasons. The tolerances that you can achieve with mechanization were just impossible to achieve with a human. And you're going to see the same thing with data analysis. You just can't look at these data sets with a human anymore and expect, even with a relational database, there's too many different types of data to even throw at it. We need things that can handle more abstract And then beyond that, we have to look at how do we make decisions based on patterns that we don't even know that there are patterns. And again, computers are good at recognizing those things. But it'll be for a good period of time, computers assisting humans, not computers replacing completely humans. I hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also personally would add my comment on the same question. Imagine that when human, well, there are, first of all, I agree with what Ben said about that. There are jobs that will be created, will be destroyed, but there will also be jobs, or maybe more jobs be created, because when the company will create a lot of wealth by creating this AI machine, they also need to hire a lot more people to work continuously to improve the machine. So there are, for example, from simple jobs like, okay, we are, experts in designing certain things, but you don't have computing skill, but you can be part of the AI team to solve a specific problem. And then we have the analyst job, right? We have the data scientist job. From the outside, you guys look at the AI world, you probably will think, okay, those are the jobs for the programmers, but it's not the case. In the AI project, typical AI project or services, you need people to clean up the data, you need people to look at some intermediate results, and also help the machine to tune the machine, to train, it's not just completely, automated. Because the process of building artificial intelligence itself is very, very labor intensive.
It's a large project, and it requires project managers, requires analysts, it requires all the same things that we, thought that were kind of completely replacing. For a large period of time, it's not going to be like the artificial intelligence where you just see in the movies and you throw all this data in and magically out comes, this walking cyborg that does everything. And the fact, no, it just doesn't exist yet, and it won't for a long time.
It's sci-fi movie.
Yeah, we can hope. And if you are worried about this, come and learn to code is a good place to start. And to see just how hard it is, and join us.
Question?
You please, yeah.
Okay,
You mentioned that you are going to start a company called Electrify. So is this the company to help the bank or to help the start companies or anything that you can provide them?
So I am focused on both startups as well as larger companies. I'm not partial to one or the other. I'm in a unique position where I've gotten to see both perspectives of what a startup needs to get started. And a lot of times, startups may lack technical individuals to get their idea off the ground. Where that skill may already be available in a larger company. A lot of times the challenges of larger companies, they have the right people, they just aren't able to perhaps coordinate around the right problem and ask the right questions. So a different set of problems that they have. I'm open to either. I'm obviously very new to starting this company out. It remains to be seen how much time I could spend towards either. It's usually best, like when we had a clear object, when we got started, we tended to focus on larger clients first. Mainly because when you're in a startup, you need the large clients to pay the bills. It's the nature of the business. You have to have that large tenant to make sure you anchor it. As we figured out how to solve the large clients, we then started looking at the solutions we were providing and saying, how can I slim this down to a repeatable, very small offering, the minimum viable product? That's not always the approach that a startup should take. A lot of people would advocate, you start with your MVP, then you go to your big. Both approaches can work, and I think it's an important question that a company that's starting out should look at. In Clear Object, we were lucky to have some good relations with large companies that had problems, and we knew that if we solved their problem, one day we could work our way backwards to an MVP, and that's what we did. We created a minimum viable product out of the solutions we built for a customized tenant who was paying a lot of money, and then we were able to then sell that to a lot of individuals. So for myself, I haven't quite figured out which one I'll do. Right now, probably start with a little bit of both to see if there's enough business to work with startups individually, or if there's a product that I can work on customized for a larger client. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah. I think it's a challenge that a lot of startups have, is where do you get started? Curious if anybody else, who else here works in a startup today? Who works for what they would consider a medium or even a large company? The rest? Okay. A lot of companies, they struggle with the first product. If you're a technology company, your first product probably should be a small one. Because it's so difficult to get it right, and you don't want to build something that nobody's going to buy. If you're in a lucky position, though, that you already have somebody who says, I'll buy it, and I'll write the check for it, build whatever they want. Yeah.
So, last question? No? Okay, there's not there. Last question. Oh, thank you.
So for a really small software team, maybe consisting with 2 or 3 people,
Sure.
they found many absolute advantage or obvious advantages, but they want to focus they want to get involved with machine learning. So do you have, in your opinion, do you have any advice for where they should start from? Should they start from doing consulting, or should they go straight to build their own physical products? Or do you have any ideas where they can look for their opportunities?
So I'm going to repeat the question, make sure I got it right. So you're a small team of developers working on an application, and 2 or 3 developers. Mobile application, and your client wants you to focus on doing a machine learning problem.
We want to focus on
Fine. Honestly, machine learning can mean so many things. For some people, literally machine learning can be just running through a relational database and figuring a pattern out and being able to execute on it, say anytime I exceed a threshold is the easiest of machine learning. To say, if it gets above 10 degrees Celsius, trigger this particular warning out. Well, that's technically, you can make it learn that, and then you can adjust the model based on different patterns of weather. You can adjust it based on a variety of other input sources. For yourselves, it's more important to ask the question not of, am I going to do machine learning, but what problem are you going to solve? I would love to talk to you perhaps after the session to hear more about what your application does today, and then discuss options about different machine learning options that you can use. Again, a threshold could be technically a machine learning, and you can adjust the threshold based on outside parameters. You can make it a lot more complex depending on the question you're trying to solve. It's vague. Let's talk after this.
So you prefer the consulting services?
For me, again, I'll talk to you for free afterwards. I don't need to be paid. But I think what the important thing to take away with the machine learning is that there's no one size fits all ever for the machine learning or artificial intelligence. It is a consultative approach for at least today. There is no, unlike a human where you can kind of put the human in and they'll hear the problem and then they'll go figure out the right answer. I've yet to see any AI or any machine learning that does it like that. They're all very prescriptive AI, prescriptive machine learning, and to a certain degree. They have bounds, they have parameters. You can teach them on your subject, and then once it knows that particular subject, it can answer in a way that's somewhat predictable. I think it's important for whatever problem you're looking at to understand what are the bounds and parameters, and then what data do you have available to go and teach a machine to go learn on that. Hope that helps.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, man. And yeah, that's I mean that's to conclude this session. I would like everybody to to stand up and give you a warm applause. Thank you.
Thanks again for having me.